Hello and welcome everyone to our second Leadership Journeys session of our January 2023 Global Immersion Lab on the theme of developing others. We have people from all over the world tuning us on Zoom, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And my name is Nilima Raheja. I'm an Atlas Corp fellow serving with Heartland Alliance International. And I'm very excited to be today's session moderator and to be with our incredible guest. And before we begin and introduce her, we would like to remind you that we will be monitoring the chat on each of the platforms. So make sure to ask our speaker any question that you would like, and we'll get back to the audience questions towards the end of the session. And before we begin, I think it's time for us to warm ourselves a little bit. And I have an icebreaker question for all of us here, which is if you could have dinner with one individual from history on the current day, who would it be? You can write your answers in the chat or comment section. And while you do that, I think I could begin introducing our speaker for the day, which is Nada Zohdy. She's a dedicated nonprofit leader. Hi, welcome, Nada.
Hello.
And she's a social entrepreneur and network builder with a decade of experience as a democracy advocate and 15 plus years of experience as a community builder, which is particularly organizing Muslim American communities. And she skillfully creates and executes new mission driven strategies and partnerships and leads high performing teams and collaborations. And Nada is currently the first global network lead at the Obama Foundation, where she's creating and implementing a strategy to connect nearly 1,000 alumni of Obama Foundation's leadership programs in over 100 countries who are working on diverse social change issues to support each other and work together, including on global challenges to democracy. Welcome again, Nada.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, the icebreaker question that I just asked, I think we have a response from Solu from Nigeria who says Barack Obama. Well, I think Nada, it's the right time that we jumped right back to you. What would be your answer to that? If you could have dinner with one individual from history or the current day, who would it be?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a fun question to begin our conversation for today. Honestly, for me, there's so many different leaders that I would love to have dinner with, and I appreciate the example someone just gave, of course. But actually, I thought for today, maybe I could share someone who might not be familiar for the audience here, which is a man named Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a French democracy scholar, basically, who had visited the United States in the early 19th century. So very early in the founding of this country's history. And he wrote a book called Democracy in America, which I think is just a very powerful examination of what the early United States looked like from an immigrant perspective. And he talked a lot about how unique America was in kind of building a culture of civil society and volunteer associations, and all these things that I'm very interested in. So basically, I think he was a historical figure whose writings are still very relevant for us today, living in democracies in the United States and around the world as well. So I thought I would share that this morning.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think, yeah, I've not heard of him, so I'm sure it's a new insight for all of us here.
Yeah.
And I think to start off with, we would love to hear more about your origin story of how you became the dynamic social impact that you are today. If you could maybe share a little bit about your background and how you initially started off as a community builder and organizing specifically in the Muslim community and how this interest developed further for you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nilima. I'm so happy to be here again. And whenever I get to speak with different groups, I love to make things interactive, actually. So before I answer your question, I just wanted to share a quick question for the audience as well, which is, what do you think are some key characteristics of successful leaders? I think, I would love to hear in the chat and also just from you, Nilima, like what are some aspects that you think of when you think of leadership, since of course that's our topic for discussion. And then I would love to start sharing my perspective and also my story.
Sure. I think while the audience shares, I could quickly share. For me, I think it's about A good leader would be somebody who builds people along, not just be the only one leading the pack, but also building people along that they could move together. I think that is one of the things which stands out for me for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I agree so much. And that's part of why I was so happy to speak with you today for the Leadership Lab, because this theme of developing others, I really think it's not just something nice for leaders to do, but it's really essential to be truly good leaders. And, I love to think about a definition of leadership from one of my own teachers, who's an amazing scholar and community organizer named Marshall Gans. And so I wanted to share this definition of leadership right in the beginning as we get started. So Marshall Gans likes to define leadership as accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose in the face of uncertainty. So I'll say it one more time because I think it's such a rich definition. Accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose or common goals in the face of uncertainty. I think that's just so powerful. And I again, had the chance to study with Marshall, and I love to remind myself of that definition because I really think it's truly critical to be enabling others. Leadership is not about having a certain title or position, but it's really about how do we enable others to act on their common values and goals. So anyway, so that was just a little introduction. Again, I'd love to see, more ideas in the chat here, what you think of as great leadership. But to tell you a little more now about my own journey, again, my name is Neda Zohdy. I live and work in Washington, D.C., and I am a Muslim woman and an Egyptian American. And my identity has always been playing a big part in my life choices and including in my career choices. So basically, my parents immigrated to the United States from Egypt many years ago, and I was born and raised near Detroit. And I was a coming of age, like a young person when 9/11 happened here in this country. And then also I was becoming a young adult when the Arab Spring happened in Egypt and in many other countries in the Middle East. And so those kind of global moments, I think, really shaped not only my identity, but especially my sense of purpose, and really committing my career to public service and social justice. And it was actually through exploring my own personal faith as a Muslim where I found strong messages, speaking to me about devoting yourself to service, devoting yourself to social justice. And it was just so hard for me to see, media like headlines every day where, people were kind of challenging the idea that you could be a modern Muslim or, that there's this clash of civilizations. And also just seeing so many people speaking on behalf of Muslim women, except us as Muslim women. So, excuse me. So I think all of these things really motivated me to feel like I had an important perspective to contribute to international affairs and also just to building communities, in my local city and my country. So I decided to really focus on public service and the nonprofit sector with a focus on international issues. And I think throughout my career, I've always tried to really be a bridge builder who can help people from different backgrounds and different perspectives really find ways to work together for those common goals. So in the beginning, I was connecting activists after the Arab Spring in places like Egypt with policymakers here in the United States. And then in my more recent roles, I was doing a lot of bridge building between governments and NGOs who were trying to promote open government and accountability. And now I get to do the same in my current role with the Obama Foundation, connecting an amazing global network of leaders, just like with the Atlas Core Fellows. So I'm really happy to be here. And I think my first piece of advice maybe is to really think about your own story and own your own story and share it with the world. Because if you don't share your own story, other people may be trying to speak on your behalf. But you can find so much power in really knowing your purpose and your values and identity and using that to drive your career and your other choices.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Nada. And I'm sure while you inspire us with your story, but yeah, it's a great message for us to own our own stories as well. You shared about the leadership definition that you have lived by so far. Maybe if you would like to shed a little bit more light on how your personal leadership style or development style has been impacted by it and how it shows up in your current work as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I appreciate this question because I think all of us, need to learn from people with more experience than us, and that we should also help pay it forward to empower younger leaders from us and help them grow in their careers. So again, another piece of advice which I received early, and I think is still one of the best pieces of advice I got for my career, is to always have at least one or two people who are your mentors and one or two people who are your mentees. So you're learning from your elders, let's say, and you're also helping to empower and uplift younger leaders. So when I think about different leadership models, I mentioned people like Marshall Gans, who I got to study with at the Kennedy School, and other amazing teachers. But I also think about, my mother and father and how much they each taught me key skills that are important for leadership and for having a healthy career. My mom is such a hardworking woman, and she is a professor in an engineering department at a university. And she was actually the first woman literally in the department that they had ever hired back in like the early 1980s. So she was just really a trailblazer in so many ways throughout her career. And she really had to prove, challenge people's stereotypes about women in science and all of these things. And meanwhile, my father, who's also a professor of engineering, same university, he really leads with compassion. He's such an empathetic person, and working with his students and his colleagues, he's just a very compassionate person. So I try to reflect those characteristics in my own leadership that I learned from both of them.
That's wonderful, Nada. Thank you for sharing that. And I think we have some comments, some things from our audience as well around leadership that you asked about earlier, which is Al Akbar says leadership is passion, accepting responsibility, accommodating others irrespective of their views.
Mm.
And we have one more from Michelle from Mexico, who shares successful leadership recognize people's talents and also is someone who does something that many people could do but very few dare.
Yeah, I love these. Thank you. And let me say also, I'm just a huge fan of Atlas Core. I've had the privilege to partner with Atlas Core since 2017. I've supervised and hired many fellows in my previous role, and again, I'm not surprised that we're hearing such great answers because I know how amazing you all are as fellows. Working in so many positions and coming from around the world. So it's really just a pleasure to spend time with you and to learn, with you as well, since we share these values of collaborative leadership.
Thank you for being a cheerleader, Nada. With that, moving on, you previously served as a director at OpenGov Hub, the world's first innovation hub dedicated to helping open up governments to their people and empower citizens around the world. And during this time, you led through a phase of growth, including 2 times the revenue and 4 times the partnership programs and the team size while maintaining 95% member satisfaction, which is great. Can you tell us more about your strategies for success at OpenGov Hub? How did you attract partners? How did you keep your members happy? How was that?
Of course, yeah. So I was so lucky to get to lead such a unique organization for 7 years. I just left that position about 6 months ago before joining the Obama Foundation. And OpenGov Hub is such a unique meeting place that brings together organizations with common values to really help them share resources and work together for greater impact. And I'm so happy to report that Atlas Core itself is a member of that amazing network of organizations. So I think over the years, I was very entrepreneurial in my position, let's say, and I think that one of the first pieces of advice, let's say, that I would give from that experience, I think, is to never feel constrained, let's say, by the particular details of your job description. I think each of us, of course, work in different environments, and it's so important to think about how can you do an excellent job with the core areas of responsibility that you have. But I especially encourage you to think about where can you be entrepreneurial, and what I mean by this is, where can you really identify new opportunities for work that maybe no one has ever even thought of before. But as long as it's, in service of the mission of your organization, and you can think about some resources that you can creatively identify to do that work, I think that's such a powerful way, not only to contribute to the success of your organization, but also to your own personal professional growth and success. So I mentioned that in the beginning because, again, I think from the first day that I joined OpenGov Hub, when I was the only employee for the organization, and then I got to grow and lead it over the next several years. I think a lot of people could have just seen what it was in its current state and accepted, like, okay, this is what OpenGov Hub is. There's a shared space, co-working space. There's a bunch of nonprofits. They're sharing resources and so on. But I think each year I was able to create new initiatives because I had so much passion for the potential of this huge global mission. And so I encourage you again to do an excellent job with your core responsibilities, of course, and also think about where is there possibility maybe that no one has envisioned before, and how could I contribute in my own role with my own skills to making new things happen that are accelerating the social impact and the mission of your organization. I think a second key lesson that I learned in my OpenGov Hub leadership, which was really critical to our success, was to really, really lead with listening and always close the feedback loop. So what I mean by this is I was so diligent about always listening to our member organizations, because in the end, they were the core stakeholder that we were existing to serve and support, right? So the more we were helping our members be successful, the more OpenGov Hub was fulfilling its own mission successfully. And so, it's very easy for all of us to come in with, of course, our own visions and our own plans and so on. But in addition to providing my own ideas and initiatives, I really tried to, at every step, listen very intently to the members as the network grew and as it evolved. What do members need? What is working really well? Where do they see potential for collaboration, which is not happening already? So we would do, an extensive member survey twice a year, but I would also always have coffee with members, just checking in. How is their work going? How is their experience? What else can they give and get from this amazing network of partners? And then always to report back to members, especially after the big surveys that we did, about the results. Because I think one of the mistakes some people make is, you ask your stakeholders for feedback, you give them a survey, you do some interviews, but you never come back to them and say, this is what we were able to do. This is the change, these are the changes we were able to make based on your feedback. That is such an important step that I learned from some of our own OpenGov Hub members who work on feedback issues in the nonprofit sector. But it's such an important step to maintain trust in those relationships. So again, I really encourage each of you, no matter what issues you're working on and in what sector, to really try to lead with listening to your most important stakeholders, who are the people you're ultimately trying to serve and empower. And then make sure you're closing the feedback loop after you ask for their feedback. Make the changes that you can make and tell them, what was the result of their feedback. Of course, you probably won't be able to make every change that every person requests from you, right? It's not realistic. But at least, again, reporting back on how you took their feedback and what changes you were able to make, and maybe why you couldn't make some other changes. It's so important to maintain those trustful relationships. So I really think, again, that was so critical to our success growing this amazing network at the OpenGov Hub over the years.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think those were some really key insights, which anybody in their work can actually implement. And yeah. I want to pick up something on collaboration specifically, which I believe is very critical to your current role also as a network builder at Obama Foundation. If you could share about why collaboration and network building is so important, and how can we be a better collaborator, or all of us be better collaborators?
Yeah, again, thank you for this question. So I'm, pretty obsessed with building networks and social capital. That's, really, I think one of truly my biggest passions, and I'm so lucky to be able to do that in my career. However, just like you've said, no matter what role each of us are in, and no matter what social issues we're working on, I really think that network building and fostering and facilitating collaborations should be part of everyone's toolkit. Every good leader, this is an essential ingredient to how we can achieve great success. And I think there's so many different reasons for this, but one of the simplest and most important reasons to focus on network building is just to remind ourselves that human beings, like, fundamentally are social creatures, right?
Yeah.
We don't just want to, like, feel a sense of belonging to a community, but we actually need to feel a sense of belonging to be happy, healthy, satisfied human beings, right? So this is so powerful, and so I encourage you each to think about, what communities are you already part of, and how can you take some small steps today, hopefully, to be a facilitator of deep and greater relationships around the social impact work that you have and the passions that you have. And I think there's lots of ways to do this successfully. I've definitely learned a lot in the last 10 years. I think it is both an art and a science. And what I mean by this is, there's some tried and true, like, proven good practices for building networks successfully. But also there's so much nuance and so many adaptations you have to make depending on the specific people that you're working with. But in terms of just a few key principles that I would share with each of you, I think, again, number one is to really start with true relationship building, person to person. So one of my big mistakes, actually, in Open Gov Hub early in my time there, was I had so much passion for all of the potential of how, these 50 organizations can work together, that I started a series of working groups. And, I was facilitating these meetings and bringing all these people together. And honestly, it was a total failure. Like, after maybe 4 or 5 months, people weren't showing up for the meetings. They weren't really interested. And I realized it was because, on paper or in theory, like, people understood that maybe they have some common goals. Like, you work on open data, for example, and so do I. Okay. But after a while, they weren't able to actually do meaningful work together because they literally had no time to build relationships and trust with each other. Like, literally, people didn't know what's the name of the person who's sitting next to me. Like, we've never actually met. We haven't spent time together, let alone to build trust and rapport. So anyway, so ever since that experience, I'm very diligent from now on, for every network that I'm part of, to make sure to build in time and activities for person to person relationship building, connecting on the human level, because that is the precondition, let's say, for deep and transformative partnerships. You can't skip that step, is what I'm trying to say. So I think that's a super important lesson. I learned it the hard way, and I hope each of you don't have to make my same mistake. And again, just remember that any partnership, any collaboration that you're doing in your work and career needs to be based on successful interpersonal relationships and fostering trust and understanding between the parties. And then, yeah, one other piece I would just share here before we go to the next question is to, there's a common business phrase, maybe some of you have heard it before, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't know how many people, right, have heard this, and people have used this in different contexts. But I think it's very true in my experience for building networks and collaborations as well. Again, you can have an amazing plan and a bunch of great ideas of, like, these two organizations should do this together, and we should partner with this person, because obviously we can benefit from each other, which is great. And you need a plan. And I love plans. Trust me, you should. I've just finished, actually, the new strategy for the network I'm leading now at the Obama Foundation. However, in addition to having a good plan, you really need to invest in the culture. What are the norms and expectations that people have for each other? How do they treat each other in the beginning of their meetings? How do they say hello and greet each other if they're seeing each other in person? Like, what are the cultural elements and the informal norms which really actually define this community, make sure that those are speaking to the values and the goals that you have. Because if you have a great plan, but the culture is very cold, people are very distant, there's some other things going on, you're never going to achieve the success that you seek. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being candid about your mistakes also and sharing then how you went on to work on them.
Yeah.
And I think my next question is going to be a deeper dive into that because the aspects of relationship building or interpersonal connections that you spoke about in big networks, inclusion, diversity becomes a huge thing. And the terms around equity, diversity, and inclusion are also thrown around a lot these days. What are some of the ways that you think folks have gotten inclusion wrong? And what does it look like to get it right, actually?
Yeah, thank you. This is another really thoughtful question. And honestly, I would love to see again in the comments reactions from each of you in the audience about this, because I also know that the American perspective and experience with diversity, equity, and inclusion issues might be very different from how this issue exists in other cultures. So again, I'd love to kind of learn from this global community of leaders here about how this works as well. But I will share, again, from my own experience, a few just personal perspectives, because I am certainly not, an expert in DEI issues. I'm very glad that many, many professions here in the United States have had like a wake-up call in the last few years, some of which related to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. I think this was overdue. A lot of our workplaces needed a big change to wake up to the reality of deep, deep discrimination and issues within workplaces, because that's a big social issue here in the United States and in many other countries. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this a lot more. But like you said, not every example is a successful one. So, again, I'm not an expert, but from my own experience as a young minority, woman of color in leadership positions, I've definitely faced challenges in the past and people underestimating me. Or, for example, I was director of the Open Gov Hub for 5 years, and I began as the manager when I first started and then got promoted. But still, like after many, many years, some people would still refer to me as the manager, like, for example, right? And again, I think part of it had to do with my identity and how people saw me, and maybe, didn't realize how much responsibility I had assumed from the hard work that I was putting in. So anyway, so I think inclusion done wrong is superficial, right? It's trying to only pay lip service, for example, by publishing a statement or of solidarity, but not looking again at the actual culture within the organization. I think that was one of my biggest frustrations, again, especially in summer of 2020, when there was a lot of kind of Black Lives Matter solidarity statements that so many organizations were publishing. Again, I'm so glad that people were making a new step forward to explore these issues and commit to real inclusion. But if those statements were not also paired with deep explorations within the organizations about the culture and about uplifting leaders who have been historically marginalized and listening to them, then what's the point, right? So I think we need to make sure that our efforts around inclusion are not just paying lip service, and they're directly linked to our core strategic goals. It's not just like a side project, and one or two people or a small department with no resources. Like that won't change the culture of any organization. It needs to be embedded and baked into the core, the core objectives based on the particular goals of that institution. So yeah, so I think, even at the Obama Foundation, certainly it's something, we are continuing to explore as an organization, and especially within the global network that I lead. Because again, different people with different nationalities and cultural backgrounds have different experiences. So how do we make sure to provide opportunities fairly and equitably across the global network? And really listen and learn again from how different people are experiencing our programs and our activities, because you have to have some humility to be a lifelong learner, to be a successful leader. And especially, I think, when it comes to being open for people to tell you how you can improve to make a more inclusive environment with such diverse leaders, working together.
That's so true. Thank you so much, Nada. And I think we are at about time for our audience also to share questions for you today. And we have one already from Tabish Bilal from India.
Mhm.
His question is, how do you feel about more scrutiny and tightening news around the work that activists and on-ground nonprofits do in light of rising far-right governments across the world?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's something, honestly, that I feel very personally challenged by. I'm sure many of you know, but my my work has focused on global democracy issues and networks for the last several years, and unfortunately, in the last 10, 15 years, democracy has been backsliding around the world, and authoritarian governments have been on the rise. So there's lots of great data from organizations like International IDEA, for example, which shows that now, as of today, more the majority of people on Earth live in societies with governments that are more closed than more open. Like they're closing, democracies backsliding, or they're non-democracies altogether. So I think honestly, this is a huge, huge global challenge, and it's part of what motivates me in my current work to think about how can we connect leaders who are working so hard to preserve and promote democratic values like inclusion and like pluralism, right? That there are people like all of us here who deeply believe that there is power in bringing diverse people together and respecting each other's views and deliberating, and that we don't always agree, but that we always have mutual respect. These are some of the core values that our leaders share in the Obama Foundation network. So I really think we need to find creative ways to protect each other and also learn from each other across boundaries. One of the programs that I'm most proud of doing in the Open Gov Hub was about 5 years ago, starting a program for American democracy reformers and leaders to learn from other countries' challenges with democracy, because truly we're facing some great challenges to American democracy and have been now for several years. But we're not the first people to worry about the changing culture and institutions here. And instead of the traditional approach of America is a perfect democratic beacon that exports its model to other countries, which used to happen in the past. Now I think again we are, and I'm personally trying to really make space for leaders from old democracies like the United States and like India, and newer democracies like Tunisia and some countries in the Middle East, to really keep learning from each other, because we face very similar challenges. And unfortunately, a lot of extremists who have very absolutist viewpoints, they're also learning from each other and sharing ideas across countries. So I think those of us who care about democratic values and care about pluralism and inclusion, need to be building partnerships to strengthen ourselves in the light of these challenges. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nada. And we have another question from Meena Ashraf from Egypt. Her question is, what are the main or common challenges that you face while pursuing your professional career, and how you manage to overcome them?
Yeah, Ahlan, Meena or Minna, I'm not sure. This is a great question, and it's a very big one. I think one of the challenges I already mentioned is, some of the, I don't know even how to put it, but I think some of the let me try to think about how to put this. As I mentioned before, like I've been working very hard in my career, and I'm still pretty young, let's say. So I've been able to take on big leadership responsibilities so far in my career. And again, I think sometimes it's been hard for me when people underestimate me because of my age or because I'm a woman or whatever it is, right? Like I've never faced like severe direct discrimination, let's say, in the workplace, but I've definitely faced situations that many women face, for example, where you suggest some great ideas and they're not taken seriously until someone else suggests them, maybe a man. And so this has definitely been part of my experience over the years, unfortunately. But I've tried to really remind myself that hard work matters, and staying devoted and committed to, my biggest passions is key to success. And then a second big challenge that I faced, to be honest with you, that I'm still learning how to balance is burnout. I think, unfortunately, many leaders like us who are very committed to social change and to having careers, in social change, we are very vulnerable to burnout because we often care so much about our missions, right? Like, no matter which organization you're at, again, if you are so passionate about, environmental issues or gender or democracy or, health and education, like many of us, our work is our lives. And especially if you're a founder also, for example, or you're leading a growing organization, as I was in my last role too. So basically, I think we need to be very careful about taking care of ourselves as leaders and not sacrificing ourselves for the mission or for other people. I'm my type is of a person is someone who, I love to help other people. That's my natural tendency. But I've had to learn to establish some boundaries over the years so that I don't become consumed by my work. And then ultimately, in a way that harms me and that harms my ability to be a sustainable leader for the long term. I've had people tell me and remind me that, you should strive to have a very long, successful, career and life. And so it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So make sure in, again, whatever role that you're doing, that you're passionate, you're focused, you're hardworking, but make sure that you have some boundaries between your work life and the rest of your life, and that you're not making big sacrifices, which you may regret later or that may cause you to burn out. I think this is super important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nada. And I think once again, it was quite relatable to me at least, and I'm sure the rest of the fellows and audience can also relate to it at some point.
Yeah.
Well, before we close today's session, one last thing I want to ask you is, or tell you rather, is that this immersion we have focused on building, managing, and leading effective teams. And what would be the final advice that you would have for our fellows on building, managing, and leading teams for future projects?
Yeah, of course. Thank you again. So let me close, I think, with probably 3 quick points on this, final words of advice for how to be a leader that really enables and develops others in your teams and in your personal lives. That I'm sure many of you are active in many organizations and activities. So the first piece of advice that I've really have come to appreciate for myself recently is to really be self-aware, like to really spend time getting to know your strengths, your weaknesses, your tendencies, getting feedback from other people, not just from your colleagues, but from, your friends, your family, like really developing this deep understanding of who are you and what are some of maybe the healthy and unhealthy habits that you have. Like what happens when you're really stressed, right? What are some of those unhealthy tendencies? Because those can all affect how you lead a team. So I truly believe that self-awareness can be your superpower. I like to say this. And there's so many different tools that you could explore to, become more self-aware. I'm sure Atlas Core provides some of these tools, but one, for example, is called the Enneagram. It's a personality framework that I find very, very powerful. So I would recommend that, for example. But just really, first idea, again, take time to really develop deep self-awareness about who you are as a person and as a leader. Again, what are the strengths, but also what are some of the weaknesses that come out when you're under stress? The second advice I have is whenever you're supervising and managing a team, really try as much as possible to delegate broad areas of responsibility rather than simple specific tasks. So I've been managing people, almost, I guess, for the last 10 years or so. And again, something I've learned over time about how to be a good manager for my team is, there may always be some small specific tasks. I need to ask someone, hey, can you please do X, Y, Z? That will happen, of course. But in general, your job as a supervisor, as a boss, is really to, again, enable others to be successful, right? And for the organization to succeed as a whole. So it's better if you can assign like broad areas of responsibility, right? Like give them the vision of success, that is your job as a leader, and then give them the resources and support to fulfill that vision, knowing that they may take maybe a different path than you would if you were in that role. So again, try to really delegate broad areas of responsibility and give a clear vision of success rather than always just giving specific tasks, because it won't be as fulfilling of a working relationship. And then finally, model the culture, that you want to see within your team. So really try to be a good example. Someone who is human with their colleagues. You don't always have to be like a stiff boss. You should be able to, again, develop relationships that ultimately get people excited to come to work and excited to spend time with each other. And just remember, again, there's so many benefits of decentralized leadership. Instead of having one person at the top who has all the responsibility, when we really have collaborative leadership, we develop others, we're more effective, we're more sustainable in our work, we're more creative because we're learning from different perspectives. We have better long-term impact. And again, finally, I think it just makes for a much more enjoyable workplace and personal career. So I really encourage you, again, to take some small steps today to think about how can you deepen your work to develop others with collaborative leadership and community building as a key part of your social change toolkit.
Thank you. I think those three were really powerful insights that I'm sure all of us can take away as fellows also in our future career journeys. Thank you so much, Nada, once again for being with us today and sharing so many powerful insights with us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Great to see you all in the chat. Wish you, great success with your next steps, and take care.
Yep. All right. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone who joined us today for another Leadership Journeys session of the Atlas Corp's Global Leadership Lab. And make sure you follow us on Facebook and YouTube for more engaging content like this. And my name is Nilima Raheja, serving with with Heartland Alliance International. And our guest today was Nada Zohdy, the current Global Network Lead at the Obama Foundation. And for more engaging content like this, make sure to follow Atlas Corps on social media and visit our website at atlascorps.org to learn about ongoing recruitment for Atlas Corps programs. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you, Nada.
Thanks. Take care.